Alrighty. So we're talking here about gaming, and I think gaming sometimes maybe gets misunderstood to a degree on just how big and where we're at really. So just can you help us frame up where we're at and what is the sort of the size of gaming, where the opportunity is?
Absolutely. So I thought we could start first with just how big gaming is generally, because I think it's bigger than most folks think. So the key metrics here are 3.38 billion global gamers, and we're on track to do 187.7 billion in revenue in 2023. I'll let you guys read the rest of those metrics and what's happening within games, and we'll move on to where we are with Web3 games. And there's really three areas that we need to cover. The first is the funding that's gone into games. The second is I think what we're seeing with Web3 games is very similar to the rise of free-to-play games 10 years ago. And the third is limited distribution and infrastructure. So on funding, we've seen about 3.8 billion go into crypto games on the equity side since 2019. And 2.8 billion of that was invested in 2021 and the first half of 22. John Jordan, who is the creator of Blockchain Gamer, he maintains a list of all equity and token investments in games across the entire crypto gaming ecosystem. So platform, games, tools, infrastructure, metaverse. His figure is 13.5 billion, so much more. And that is from 2020 to August of 2023. It takes about 4 years at least to make a AAA high-quality game. And so we're obviously early in that process where most of the funding went in 21, so we're only 2 years in. So I think that we'll start to see Web3 enhanced games that are able to compete with and beat their Web3 peers in 2024 and into 2025. I mentioned free-to-play. So I think most folks probably know that free-to-play is the dominant business model in gaming today. 80% of gaming revenues come from free-to-play, and 50% of gaming revenues are from mobile games, which are almost all free-to-play. 10 years ago, when that got started, it started in the East and then eventually made its way to the West. And people hated free-to-play games in the West, hated them, to the point that just 8 years ago, this quote was in an op-ed in a really popular gaming magazine. And essentially, they're saying that the hate for free-to-play games was to such an extent that maybe Apple would pull all free-to-play games out of the App Store. Well, that's astonishing. It's astonishing that anyone would think that, let alone a gaming publication. In 2022, Apple made $50 billion off of the games in the App Store. That's 12.6% of Apple's revenue. Apple is the third largest gaming company in the world, and it doesn't make any games. So when people tell you that they hate NFTs and hate Web3 games, just remember that they hated free-to-play too. So speaking of that, you can see here, these are the Web3 game companies the Web2 game company. There's some bad spelling there. I'm not sure what happened, but these are the Web2 game companies currently in Web3. And as you can see, most of them are in Asia. So history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. The third thing is until late last year, we didn't even know the rules of the road to build crypto games in the Apple App Store. And then we didn't know until July what we could do with the Google Play Store. We just got clarity this year there. And so crypto games have been relegated to browser. So we were missing, 7 billion people have smartphones, 4.8 billion people use the Google Play Store and Apple App Store. So we couldn't distribute games to them. And Steam still bans crypto games. Then you also add in how early we are on the infrastructure side. We still have issues with wallets, and it was only a year ago we transitioned to proof of stake. And Web2 gaming companies, they wanted to build in the Ethereum ecosystem, but for sustainability and environmental reasons, they couldn't. Yeah. And that's where all of the customers' liquidity, infrastructure, and security reside. So the point of that is just we're early. It's only been the last 11 months that we've really been able to build games on platforms where we can build technically great games and then also have distribution.
No, I totally agree. It's a huge market, right? And what I really kind of want to dig into is like I want to get into the challenges, right? The distribution, all those kind of things. But what is it? What's that core feature about these Web3 games that is like so compelling, so investable, I guess the thesis that people are going to gravitate towards over some of those Web2 games?
Yeah, so I get asked this like every second.
Yeah.
So here are, I'm just going to try to run through quickly like 7 reasons why I think Web3 is important for games. The first is really basic. It's like your first step into Web3, and that's just simple ownership of assets. So I think there's a bit of a generational divide. And you think about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and digital and physical are becoming a singular experience. And if you expect to own items in the physical world, you can bet the younger generation is going to demand ownership in the digital world. And it's not that different from the way gaming used to be. Like in the old days, you'd go to GameStop, you'd buy a game, you'd play it, you'd get tired of it. GameStop had a massive secondary market where you'd resell your games. Then you'd use that money and you'd buy a new game. So it's not all that new. The other thing I think is everybody in this room, the most valuable asset you have is your time. And so I've been playing Pokemon Go for 7 years. I have caught 51,000 Pokemon. It's embarrassing but true. I should own those Pokemon. Niantic should not. That's my time that I spent on that. The second is programmability and composability. So I plug my wallet into a Web3 game, and the game developer can see, oh, she owns that ape. She owns a clone. I'm going to segment her as a whale. So from a user acquisition standpoint, the type of data that you can get from wallets is remarkable. And it's the opposite of what's happening in mobile gaming today with all of the privacy changes that Apple has put out with deprecation of IDFA. Fingerprinting goes away at the end of this year. Blockchains are the opposite of that, for better or worse. It's completely transparent. Composability, I can plug my game into DeFi. I can plug it into borrow lend markets. I can add stablecoin payments, stablecoin, infrastructure to the game. Bringing non-spenders into game economies. So the dirty secret of traditional gaming today is only 5% of gamers spend. That means 95% of gamers are not part of game economies. The theory is that as you reward gamers with fungible and non-fungible assets, hopefully that's like sprinkling a little bit of magic on them. They become owners, and hopefully they decide to start to spend. The other piece of this is I recently heard someone saying, Roblox grew their daily active users in the last quarter, but they grew them in jurisdictions where people don't spend. And I thought, it might be more nuanced than that, because what if people have money, but they can't spend because they're not accessing the traditional financial system? So 1.7 billion adults globally are underbanked, which means that they may not use the traditional system because, immigrant, refugee, don't have credit history, bad location, don't trust an untrustworthy system in their jurisdiction. But out of those 1.7 underbanked people, 1.2 billion have smartphones. And if you have a smartphone, you can access crypto payment systems. You add crypto payment systems to games, and maybe you expand the aperture of who can spend in games. Royalties under fire in crypto right now. I think creators are so important to this space. We will figure out on-chain enforceability. I also think practically a lot of game companies will end up creating internal marketplaces where you incentivize folks to transact there, where you have more control over royalties. I wrote like a 140-page paper on the intersection of gaming and Web3, and I do an example in there where I assume that Niantic decides to allow Pokemon and Pokemon Go to be NFTs. And based on some math in there, I come up with Niantic earning between 1.6 billion and 2.3 billion in annual revenue from royalties. And the reason that spread is so big is because if most of those transactions happen in-app, they'll have to pay Google and Apple their 30%. But Niantic made 700 million in revenue for Pokemon Go in 2022. My theory is that over time, call it 5 to 10 years, games will make more in secondary royalties than they will in primary purchases of in-game items. Accessibility of creating, so that's, anyone, anywhere in the world can plug into public blockchains and create. You also have more efficient payments for user-generated content. So Fortnite and Roblox today pay their creators, but they pay them either 14 business days after revenue was generated or 30 days after the last day of the month in which the revenue was generated. Obviously, stablecoin payments, instant settlement globally. They also have $100 caps on creator payments. That may seem like a small amount to us, but to folks elsewhere in the world, that's a huge amount. Stablecoin payments, depending on what ecosystem you're in, you can settle for fractions of a cent, so you can do microtransactions. Ownership of the game, fraught with legal risk. So all I'll say here is if you think about Roblox, all the people that made Roblox valuable, that, because Roblox is all UGC, the first time they could participate in that economy and generate wealth is when Roblox went public in March of 21 for $41 billion. So crypto's trying to change all of that and start getting value to folks day one. So whether it's content creators, folks creating maps, whatever it may be, but again, legal issues there. Mobile games, I won't go into that here, but mobile gaming today is a sea of red. You and I talked about the stuff Unity just did. It's making it even more expensive for mobile game developers. I fundamentally believe that as and when Google and Apple have to compete with blockchain-based payment systems, that 30% starts to come down because right now it's 30x what it costs to do blockchain payments.
That is always just crazy to me. They can take the 30%.
Oh, yeah.
But the key point there I really like is kind of like it expands investability, right? Like you go to GameStop, that's like a big discrete, I can only sell the whole game, right? But now it's like every little game item, right, is resellable. It just opens up the financialization layer.
Absolutely.
But it does come with like a lot of challenges, right? You got to, the underlying infrastructure's got to scale. Obviously we talked a little bit about the distribution. Can you talk about, I guess, some of those key challenges and kind of how we're approaching sort of solutions to some of those?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have two key challenges right now, scalability and usability. So the CTO of Scopely posted, I think it was just last week, that Monopoly Go, which is the #1 downloaded mobile game and #1 grossing mobile game, that they're doing 2.1 million database writes per second. So they must be recording every Monopoly Go move on database. Okay, so for context, Solana at peak usage can do 2,000 user-generated transaction per second. Firedancer, which isn't yet live, but they did do a live demo, got that to 600,000, but that's still a fraction of what it would take to put a game like Monopoly Go, Game Logic, and Game State fully on chain. So we will get there. It's like internet bandwidth. You and I couldn't stream Netflix in 1995, but by the mid-2000s, it was there. So it's inevitable that public blockchains will do more than what Scopely needs, but not today. The second is usability. So in my example on like programmability, I gave you the wallet example. Well, I would never, ever, ever in a million years connect a hot wallet with an ape in it to a game. I'd be afraid of getting rugged, all my assets being drained. So we've got great systems like delegate.cash and warm.xyz, but we need to be able to delegate assets in cold storage to a hot wallet, but we want the game developer to be able to know I own those assets from a user acquisition standpoint. So we've got to figure that out. We have to figure out, obviously, better onboarding. We have to also figure out, I think one of the challenges a lot of folks don't fully understand is a lot of people are doing wallets as a service right now, which is great. But let's say that Ubisoft does wallets as a service and Scopely does wallets as a service. And I have USDC in my Scopely wallet that I want to use in my Ubisoft game. Well, they're not connected on the back end. So it's kind of like something that I think we're going to have to figure out down the road.
I agree, because I think when we say infrastructure, we just immediately think transactions per second, how much. But there is sort of what I almost call like application infrastructure that is really sort of missing. Like how do game developers can easily integrate wallets, do NFTs, all these sort of SDKs and stuff. I feel like is sort of an investable like growing area that's going to expand out. So what other sort of challenges do you see? I think distribution to me is like kind of the big one, right? Like how do we get this into people's hands, right? We know mobile games, we know the amount of revenues and stuff coming there. There's just so many challenges. Where are we kind of getting around, I guess, sort of the distribution problem?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's inevitable that we get there. It's and I think so what do we do to get there? It's the first. So first and foremost, and this is going to sound so obvious, but we have to build games that people love because you can monetize love, and that means like core game loops that are traditional just games that people want to be in, and then I think it's from there that you layer in Web3. So like when we say Web3 games, I don't see like Web3 replacing traditional games. I see it as a layer on top. But like I said, it just takes time.
Yeah.
So I think we need time to develop the games, and then time for our infrastructure to catch up. You think about Axie Infinity, right? They launched in March of 2018. They had to build their own marketplace. They had to build their own sidechain. Even if they wanted to have a stable in-game currency, USDC didn't exist. I think Tether was only $2 billion at the time. So just, and there was no distribution into the mobile store. You couldn't do Steam. So it's just, we've had like two hands tied behind our back.
You really do. And it kind of just feels like we sort of need to build. I love, you gave an example backstage on Uber, right? It's like, once you sort of built something that people love, it was like really hard. You can't take this out of people's hands, right? And this is sort of kind of where we need to get to on games.
And we'll get there.
Agreed.
We'll get there.
I think I just have like the NFT component. There's some magic there, right?
Yes.
There's also sort of like kind of an advancement now, like let's call it the fully on-chain games, autonomous worlds, whatever you want to call them. We had some talks on the AI side with the Parallel guys yesterday.
Yeah.
It was pretty interesting, right? About these NPCs that are playing around in all these, the on-chain game, if you will. What sort of opportunity or challenges do you see there? Is that like is it a gameplay innovation that we really need, or what is it?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there. So fully on-chain games, obviously we've seen them. Dark Forest, great example. But I always say, like with fully on-chain games, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. What is the game? What is the goal? Who is it intended for? So what is the game? Is it a simple like turn-based game that has low compute and you can put it fully on-chain? Or is it a AAA game like we talked about where blockchains just aren't ready? Then what is the goal? Is the goal ownership? Great. We are ready to take on-chain, we're ready to take game items and put them fully on-chain. And that's what we see a lot of games doing. But you keep game state and game logic off-chain. If the goal is complete trustlessness, then you're right back up to number 1. What kind of a game is it, and can blockchains handle it? And then who is it intended for? Is it a Web3 audience? Great. They're going to show up with a wallet and crypto and be able to spend in your game. And frankly, there's not as many crypto native folks as like Web2 gamers, so you can handle like the concurrency and the scale. If the game is intended for Web2 natives, we've got to figure out some of these challenges, like where it may make sense to onboard them into a game where the game state and game logic are off-chain and start with the items on-chain first. Autonomous worlds. Okay, when you say that, I think about the metaverse. I think the metaverse is already here. Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft. I think my phone is the metaverse. I think the internet's the metaverse. But I think and frankly, I think the metaverse needs crypto maybe more than crypto needs the metaverse, because the metaverse should be a big autonomous world that anybody can connect to and build in. The challenge with that, though, is we want a better verse, not a metaverse. So metaverse to me is very dystopian, like the book Snow Crash, but betterverse I imagine as a place where it's good for people and where they want to be. You think about living in a physical community, and if you don't like it, it's hard to leave. You got to like pack up your kids, sell your house, find schools, all that. In a digital community, it's a 1-second click and I'm out. Yeah. So we really have to figure out how to curate these worlds so that people want to be in them. And then the only thing I'd remind folks of is none of this is new. So Second Life has been around for 20 years. And that was the first open economy where you could take the in-game virtual currency, Linden dollars, and exchange it for all sorts of different fiat. That game today, 20 years later, has a 650 million GDP, 200,000 daily active users, 3 billion user-generated items, and brands like Toyota, American Apparel, Coca-Cola, Warner Brothers, they did activations there. IBM, Cisco, Amazon held board meetings there. Harvard taught there. The Department of Homeland Security did biochemical terrorist simulations in Second Life. And GameFi is not new. So in Second Life, if I was a landowner, I would pay you to sit in a lawn chair on my land so that when new people came into Second Life on the map, my property would look crowded and they'd want to come visit me, and then I'd sell them like my digital goods. So none of this is new. And the reason I bring this up is I always encourage people to study that economy, study what happened to Diablo 3's auction house, study EVE Online, and just try to understand like why something like Second Life was able to sustain but not scale. And how does Web3 change that narrative?
I totally agree. That's really where the opportunity is, right? Because crypto really allows you to do open systems at scale. I kind of call it like coordination at scale more than anything. That's
Totally.
a special thing. So this has been really exciting. I think this is kind of like this one sort of where you see consumer adopting blockchain. So this has been a really exciting talk.
Thank
Thank
you. It's been fun.
Yep.